study in which confirmation bias was reframed from being the game that you play to something that is more likely to happen in your daily lives. This was a study done in 1979. What they did is they brought in a large group of people, and they had them read a story about a woman named Jane, and it was about a week in her life, and they learned about all sorts of things that Jane did that week. And if you were to, they carefully constructed this narrative so that half of the things that she did showed her in a sort of introspective light, and half introverted light, and half the things in an extroverted light. So she was sort of 50-50 like the rest of us. Sometimes she's introverted, sometimes she's extroverted. Now, 2 days later, they bring these people back into the lab, but they divide them into two groups. They don't know they've been divided into two groups. But one group is told, hey, remember Jane, wasn't she fantastic? I think she could use your help. She's trying to get a job, and she wants to become a real estate agent. And what we want you to do is think about all the things you learned about Jane and tell us, do you think she would be right for this job? Imagine that you're sort of someone who's part of the hiring process. Is she right for being a real estate agent? So they want to answer this question. They want to test their hypothesis that she is good as a real estate agent, and they go through their memory. They actually search their memory with a confirmation bias, or through a confirmation bias lens. And in doing so, they sort of eliminate all the examples in which she was introverted and remembered the things when she was extroverted, and they answered the scientists, yes, she'd be a great real estate agent. So then they follow up with another question and said, you know what, she also applied for another job. She wants to be a librarian. Well, now they will double down with their confirmation bias, and they want to hold true to their original answer. And they now clearly don't remember any examples of her being introverted. She's a very extroverted person. They say, of course not. She'd be a terrible librarian. She's too extroverted. The other group of people, when they brought them in, they asked them the questions in reverse. Would you be a good librarian? They search their memories to see if she would be. They eliminate examples of extroversion. They remember the introversion. They say, yeah, she'd be a great librarian. And then they ask the opposite question, and they say, would she be a great real estate agent? Of course not. She wouldn't be a great real estate agent. She's too introverted. So it's the same story, same group of people, but depending on the question they're asked first, depending on the hypothesis that they see the first time, they become people split into two completely different realities. They see the world completely differently from one another, simply because of the power of confirmation bias. So that's what confirmation bias is. It is seeking to verify an estimation, assumption, guess, or whatever, and you stop your search after receiving confirmation you were right all along. Very new. It's weird because scientists tend to live in a bubble of other scientists, and they're like, yeah, of course, here's the evidence, here's the data, whatever. And then climate scientists are the worst about this because they think that they can just take their information and hand it out to the lay public, and the lay public will just go, okay, I see the graph, that's what it is. And then like people would vote that way, or policy and decision makers would make decisions based off the information. So they're very concerned. Climate scientists are some of the first people to reach out to social science and say, help us talk to people. And one of the things they first discovered was something called the backfire effect. And so what happens is they, like one study, they had people who were very, very conservative, very Republican. This is close to the time of the Iraq War, and they handed them the newspaper articles that were fake, that said that breaking news, we found weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. And they asked people to rate those newspaper articles on like a scale of 1 to 10 of how accurate they felt it was, or how honest, or how valid. How good was the writing, stuff like that. And they rated them, not a 10, but kind of up there. And then they would give them a second piece of paper and say, I'm sorry, we had a mix-up. That actually was corrected quickly after. This is the actual headline. And the headline is now corrected to say, no, they didn't find weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. And then they say, will you please re-rate the original paper, though? We don't want to mess up our numbers. And then they go back and they rate it as higher. Like the original thing with the original headline that discounts the truth is now rated at a 10.
It's like double down on their own.
Yes.
Double down on their own bias. And
right.
I believe it all the more, and the evidence.
And it's true on both sides of the political aisle, because they've tried it with a number of issues. So the backfire effect is so powerful that when you hand you a document that has the corrections already built into it, and people will feel more strongly about what they felt going in than they did after they see the corrected version of something that they know that they originally believed being discounted. So it's a very powerful force, and you have to realize that there's almost no way around experiencing it. So you have to, instead of trying to get rid of it, you try to expect it and mitigate the damage.
So if you think about a design organization or a company that has a particular, let's say, again, a new feature set coming in, and the leadership, let's say, is bought into them, and they want them, maybe they were the ideas of the leadership, and again, that confirmation bias is going to be really difficult to counter in that context, to be able to say, wait a minute, what do you mean my idea wasn't the best new feature for our product? And I think that's where this can get really destructive. Definitely, you have to realize as you're doing UX research that these same concepts, not only do they play you as a UX researcher, or they play your organization as you try to make decisions, they're also playing your users as well. So you really have to start looking deeper into the user as well. And we talk about how to avoid these things. I think that it seems like the trick is to try to disprove your assumptions instead of trying to validate your assumptions, right?
Well, you always treat every product, treat every decision, every strategy as a hypothesis, and then you're always gathering evidence. And at some point, you have to do what scientists do, which is seek the null hypothesis, which is whatever your assumption is, turn it upside down and seek the opposite, and see if the opposite gives you some results. If it does, then obviously then you're going to get a more complete idea of whatever it is you're trying to push out for.
Okay. Fantastic. So why don't we do this? Again, we're going to go through 5 of these today, so why don't we go ahead and move on to the next one?
Sure. Okay, so this is a poster a friend of mine made. We went out to a parking lot, and I picked some guy up, and he changed it to this. It's a propaganda poster for the Department of War Math that did not actually exist, but I wish it had existed. It actually was called the Applied Mathematics Panel. It was a real thing they invented in the 1940s. The U.S. military, they put together a group of scientists, mathematicians, and statisticians, and they just basically had them do math to try to win the war for the Allies. And they did all sorts of things you've heard about, cryptographic research and bomb sites and amazing stuff, submarines, all sorts of stuff, math. But one thing they worked on most of all toward the end of the war was something called aircraft survivability. And basically what they wanted to do, the Allies wanted to make sure that we had more bombers come home than the enemy had come home. And they were trying to figure out, what can we do? How can we make these planes more sturdy? So one of the things they did a lot of deep analysis. One of the simple things they did is they handed out cards that were a little simpler than this, and they gave them to ground crews. Whenever a plane would come into land, they would say, just mark on the card where it was shot. And so over time, thousands of these come together into this really crude heat map, and they find that the planes are mostly shot in the center of the fuselage, around the tail gunner, and out on the wings. Now, the analysis wasn't complete, but the commanders were eager to put it into action. This is very actionable, it's very easy to read. And you can't armor an airplane like a tank or it won't take off. You have to be very specific. So they said, all right, great, you've shown us where these planes are getting hit, we'll put the armor there and we should be good to go. And when the scientists heard this, they freaked out massively and they had to stop the armoring process. They said, no, you're making a huge mistake. Okay, so I love this example because obviously, the stakes can't be any higher. You'll never experience stakes this high in whatever you're doing. This is the fate. And they created an entire department. There were 11 research groups at 11 different universities. One of the groups was called the Philadelphia Computing Section. It was a group of all women mathematicians who all day long, every day, just wrote out ballistics tables for the war, which could be done with one program that could run on your phone today. So it's a huge effort to not make a mistake, and then they got the information and they made a mistake immediately. And here's what the mistake was. The statistician said, think about this for just a second, okay? These planes made it home. So you're looking at where a plane can be shot and make it home. You're worried about the planes that didn't make it back. And they were probably shot where these planes weren't. So put the armor where there's no damage because the holes show where they're the strongest already. And that's what they did, and it did indeed help them turn the tide of the war. And their problem was that they weren't paying attention to data that was missing because they didn't know the data was missing at all. Here's my favorite example of this. Frontier log cabins. Okay, there's a photographer, I actually talked to him this week, because I've been using this example so much, he's like, I love you. Mike Johnson, the online photographer, check out his blog, he talks about a lot of cool stuff. He was talking about, he takes pictures of these frontier log cabins, and people will always come up to him and say, man, they really don't know how to build things the way they used to, huh? And he's like, what do you mean? He's like, look at this, they're still standing after 100 years, and they're made out of mud and wood. We couldn't make something like that with modern materials and expect it to last that long. He's like, no, you have a completely wrong idea. This is most log cabins, they fell over immediately, right after they were built, like within a couple months. They were terrible buildings, and they were made with poor materials, and the first bad weather that came through destroyed them. The only log cabins that I can take pictures of are the ones that are still standing, and they are not examples of what a log cabin is. 99% of all log cabins have been destroyed by the elements, and that's the example of what a real log cabin is. We're thinking about the archetypical example of a log cabin. That's what it is, not these happy, lucky survivors. So a good example of this in our modern lives is finding a cluster of super successes. It could be apps, could be businesses, could be people. One great example are restaurants. Wherever you live, there's probably a place where there's a cluster of very successful restaurants that make money hand over fist. And people see that and they think, maybe I should get into the restaurant business. But when you see a cluster of super successes, you're actually seeing a business that you probably should avoid, because most restaurants, statistically speaking, they fail within the first 2 years. But when a restaurant fails, it just goes away. It's deleted, like the airplanes that never made it home. And all that's left behind are businesses that are successful. And in an environment this hostile, you have to not just be successful, you have to be super successful. So over time, that culling process just leaves behind a cluster of super successes. And it makes you think, yes, great, let's do that. But instead, it's showing you that this is a hostile environment that you probably should avoid, because the only real way to get ahead will probably be something called luck. The cemetery of failed restaurants is very silent, and it's not something to be said in Black Swan. So let's say you have an example of two 100-year-old people, and you say, what is the secret? How do you live this long? And they say, here's my secret. I drink bourbon 3 times a day. I only eat bacon. I eat nothing but bacon and drink nothing but bourbon. And that's how I live to be 100 years old. And you go, I'm going to start doing that. But obviously, of all the people that have ever lived, very few make it to 100. And whatever allowed these people to get to 100 wasn't the bacon and the bourbon. It was some factor they probably aren't even aware of. Probably luck of the genetic draw out to 100. We do the exact same things when we start auditing people and putting them on the cover of magazines and asking them for interviews and asking them, how did you get what you got today? And they'll say, it was because of this decision that I made and this decision that I made. When really, most likely, is these people were in a hostile environment. They are the planes that made it back. They are the people that drank bourbon and bacon all day, the restaurant that didn't fail. And they don't actually know how they got where they got today, but if you ask somebody how they got where they got today, they will tell you a story, because that's what we do. The great psychologist Daniel Kahneman, who won the Nobel Prize in Economics for talking about this kind of stuff, he said that you should take a look at all the great iconic businesses that we look up to and look through their biographies and see, is there a moment when they were kind of struggling? Find that moment and see if anybody in the organization knew that the decision that they were about to make would lead to the company they are today. He says that has never happened. You'll never see it. He's done the research, he says it's not there. And the great quote from him on this is, a stupid decision that works out well becomes a brilliant decision in hindsight. And if you look at a group of successes and put them together, Daniel Kahneman says the only thing that will make them similar, the only real answer will be luck. And this is called survivorship bias. Sometimes it's the tendency to focus on survivors instead of whatever you would call a non-survivor, depending on the situation. It could be the living versus the dead. It could be successes versus failures. It could be winners instead of losers. Any process that leaves behind survivors, the non-survivors will be destroyed or muted or removed from your view. So, when failure becomes invisible, you pay more attention to success. And not only do you fail to recognize that what is missing might have held important information, you fail to recognize that there was any missing information at all.
And I just want to remind you where you all are right now. You're at South by Southwest. This is a survivorship bias festival. This whole place is nothing but survivorship bias.
Even me, and you, that's what this is.
I was actually listening to Bizstone, the guy from Twitter, and he was really kind of flip about his advice to people. And he said, oh yeah, my last business, we did the business plan, we hand drew it, just made a couple-page PDF out of it. And again, if you were thinking, wow, I'm going to do what Bizstone does and I'm going to be as successful as he does, that's totally the way that I'm going to make my business plan, you would get laughed out of the boardroom. The thing is, that man poops gold, right? So everybody wants to do what he does, but it's not a model for success. I think the whole notion of survivorship bias has a big tie-in to the way we think about even competitive research, right? You go out, you talk to your clients, like, oh, we're going to go find out what your competitors are doing. And I'm not saying competitive research is bad, but if you just think about what you're doing, you're not researching the competition that already went under. You're only researching the survivors. And again, I think we're going to start falling into some of these same traps. So I think the immediate question is, how like, if we're going to do competitive research, how should we perform that research in a way that makes sense so we don't fall victim of it?
Disagreement, but they believe they're in a minority because they see a majority behaving in a way that is different. You're going, this is crazy, right? And a noisy minority can convince the majority's in the minority. So when a group of people are collectively unsure how to act, they hide their ignorance by mimicking each other's outward behaviors. And so if their outward behavior is one way, but their inward behavior is another, this is what ends up being the process. And there are many common results of this that we see. Group support for a norm that nobody actually supports leads to an action that nobody actually wants to act. They keep going. Proceeding with confidence when no one is actually confident and knows what's going on, but nobody raises their hand and say, I have no idea what's going on. And so then you reach the next stage, and so you get deeper and deeper and deeper into your ignorance. Or, and this is something you'll see in all societies, slow down of social change. Like, let's take gay marriage as an example. Like the moment in which all the groups who are in support of gay marriage could push to try to make a law about it was masked by pluralistic ignorance, because we don't quite know when the time is right, because it's not clear. No one tends to speak their mind on the issue until they're absolutely sure they're safe to do so. So big social issues tend to happen decades after they could have happened because they're slowed down by pluralistic ignorance. All the big research in this was done during integration, and that was what the scientists found, was that we went door to door and asked people, they'd be like, I hate integration. You know, well, how do you vote? Well, I vote for it because my neighbors vote for it, and I don't want it. But if you ask each person individually, they all disagree with it. So they found a massive population of people voting against their own interests out of a belief that they were outcasted somewhere.
I think this happens in design organizations all the time, especially. I mean, I've had countless number of times where I've had a creative director who came up with an idea, and then the more junior people on the team jumped into the idea, and well, the creative director believes in this, so I'll go along with that too. Yeah, that sounds like a great idea, we'll do that. And meanwhile, I'm sitting in the background going, does no one else think this is the dumbest thing they've ever heard in their life? And like, nobody is saying anything, and I'm like, why isn't anybody saying that this is terrible? So I do think that we can build ourselves into this in design organizations, and I think we do it all the time. And I think what's really important here is that we think about what we can do to prevent this from happening. With pluralistic ignorance, I think getting people in smaller groups so that people can express their actual opinions. And this is really difficult, especially in hierarchical organizations. Right? Anytime you've got a creative director and an art director and a designer and a junior designer, that junior designer might be sitting there going, this is the most moronic thing I've ever heard, but be damned if they're going to speak up and like disagree with all these other people in the room. So I think one of the things that we can do is try to take advantage. I mean, we all hire smart people. Let's take advantage of those smarts. But we have to put those people in environments where they feel like they can speak out about something, where they feel like they can actually ask somebody, like, did you think that was kind of dumb? And the other person says, actually, I thought it was kind of dumb too. It's like, then suddenly you start breaking this down, right?
Yeah, it's really important that you reframe it. So like, this is going to seem like it's complaining or grousing, or that you're trying to take down the upper management, whatever it is, right? So one strategy to get rid of it is to just reframe it and say like, okay, we're on this project, we're going to form an action squad, a protection squad. Like your job is to, call out when you think that maybe we're going down the wrong path, sort of push us in the right direction. And you will, at the end of every meeting, you're going to get off the side and you're going to say, you're going to get together with two people and figure out what you think. Maybe you will go around to more people and gather up the evidence. And then the next time you present it, and then as a group, you can be like, okay, we see that. There's some positives and negatives. And then like you slowly have a squad that's like pushing you away from close. And just reframing it really helps, because no one wants to feel like they're their decisions or their.
I mean, we can do this in constructive ways. There's the crit format where people can feel like they can push back. I mean, there's ways that we can do this.
And talk to if you feel like you can't talk to somebody above your pay grade. Talk to your peers and figure a way to turn that back.
Yeah, and I think also there's a huge cultural component to this as well that I think we're going to have to talk about, which is you have to make it okay for younger people in your organizations to speak out about what they think. If those people don't feel comfortable doing that, they don't feel like they're in the safe environment to do that, then they're not going to, and they're just going to kind of ride along with whatever safe.
Yeah, there's scientists who say that like this leads to groupthink. You've probably heard of groupthink before, and they said that the Cuban Missile Crisis was likely an instance of a small group of people in a room being hindered by this process, leading them to a groupthink moment where almost everybody was like, we probably shouldn't do that. But nobody told anybody, and nobody told the president, and so they just went ahead. They have all these people doing something that no one wants to do, and it could have destroyed humanity. So it's a primate reaction to group dynamics, It is it's ecologically sound, as they would say, and you know, like it made sense in the environment in which it's purposeful. But you put a group of people, maybe people shouldn't have the power to destroy the planet, but since they do, you put them in a room and this can happen. This could be the result.
I think that's an interesting point, though. These are primate responses. A lot of these are actually been played out in people doing research with primates.
Oh yeah, capture monkeys do this kind of stuff all the time, and it makes sense in an environment where you're it's life or death, where they might get ostracized. You're trying to make group decisions, you know, that kind of thing, that are about where to get my food. Right? I
think that's a really important point. Like, these aren't things we do because we're smart human people. Like, these are things that primates do. This is like built into us, and it's really difficult to get around these things.
Yeah.
And when we see the primates expressing the same biases, it's just kind of a
it cost a whole lot of money, and about halfway through it, they realized they would never make up the money. But they went ahead and made it, and they went ahead and put people on it, and just so they would, because they were like, we can't spend this much time, money, and effort on something and not actually go all the way with it. What does that mean? But the overall cost was greater because of it. So in order to avoid the psychological pain of loss or waste, people were refused to, as they quote from the scientists, abandon a failing course of action. Or sometimes it's referred to as an escalation of commitment, which you have to really look out for, because you can get yourself into this in all sorts of situations, professional and private and personal. The more you invest in something, the harder it becomes to abandon over time. And you feel like you've just come too far to waste the resources, the money, and the time and effort spent you've already expended.
I don't know. How many people here can immediately start seeing how this happens in their organizations? Yeah, right? I mean, I look at this and I'm like, how many times have you been in a client and they're like, yeah, well, we bought the CMS package 3 years ago, and we spent like $250,000 customizing it, and I know it's not mobile friendly, but well, you know, we really got to get our money out of it before we can move on to another platform. And you're like, okay, yeah, but your bounce rate for mobile traffic on this CMS is like 85%. So obviously the people coming to your site now don't want to use this experience. And they're like, yeah, well, we spent $250,000 on it. What are we going to do? We got to get our money out of it. And I'm like, well, this happens so many times in my life, and I understand that there's cost implications to everything we do. But I think one of the big things that we have to also imagine is what are the opportunity costs for not doing that. So we have to put a price tag on what it costs to not abandon that CMS product and go with something that's either fully responsive or something that's actually going to serve their clients better in the long run. I think that this is probably the most widely
I mean, wars. Yeah. Wars continue for years because of a whole bunch of people, you know, feeling the horrible, grinding emotions of the sunk cost fallacy, and telling them we can't have done all this in vain. Those words, in vain, will get you into even deeper, you know, holes.
Right, and anytime someone says we can't do this and they give you a cost reason to do it, at least ask yourself, is this in play here? And like I said, in those moments you really have to ask yourself, what is the cost that we're missing? What is the opportunity cost?
The thing about what is your goal? Like, what do you actually want? What is the actual last thing you're trying to achieve? Like, let's say you go to one of these taco trucks and you get some tacos, you take them up to your room, and you realize, oh, these are awful. These are the worst things you've ever had. And then you eat them. when you could just go get something that you'd rather have. But you're thinking, well, I don't want to have wasted that money. But you're thinking, what was your goal in the end? To have something delicious. And you can't get the money back. It's never coming back to you. So why would you get even deeper into a horrible situation by eating crap?
I mean, I've been in situations where we're designing something, we're trying to iterate with a client, and it's not working, and it's not working, and it's not working, and like, at some point we're like, well, we can't stop. We've got to figure this thing out. And sometimes the right course of action is abandon this course of action and try something different, right? Or start thinking laterally and try to say, you know what? Well, this isn't working. Let's say, well, how can we shift this into some way that possibly can work here? So again, whenever you start feeling like you're starting to spin your wheels and you're really reinvesting or you're doubling down on something that's not working, ask yourself if you're falling victim to the sunk cost fallacy.
And think about businesses that have, like Nintendo Nintendo made playing cards, you know, and eventually they're like, well, it's a similar business, but let's move this way. So you don't have to, you have a group of people, a corporation is a group of people, it's a group of people making decisions better than one person can make decisions, right? That's the idea behind it. So it doesn't matter what you were founded to do. You can take those great people and do something different and don't feel like you have all these sunk costs and these obligations to continue whatever you're making. let's go back a couple thousand years. And the Greeks looked at animals by firelight, and they saw their eyes glint in the firelight. And this led them to come up with this theory. Learned, I say theory, but scientific sense is a hypothesis. Let's say a theory. They had this theory that the way vision is accomplished is obviously by some sort of energy that is existing in the skulls of animals. And when they look at things, the energy escapes like laser beams, and it shoots things, and that's how we see. And this is actually what great thinkers said was the truth. This is something that Plato was very big and was very big about. He's like, that is how vision works. I'm telling you, it is fire that comes out of your eyes. And so his contemporaries were like, well, if fire comes out of your eyes, why don't you burn my face off? This is because it's a gentle fire. I just imagine the tail going, it's a gentle fire. Those are the actual quote, gentle fire, that's what he said it was. He says it just kind of goes out and touches the world. It doesn't quite sear it. And I said, well, how come at nighttime I can't see if there's fire coming out of my eyes? He's like, well, it has to mix with another fire. It has to be like a campfire or the sun or something like that. And when it mixes with that fire, that's the point of vision. They're like, okay, that makes sense. So,
yeah, but people believe this. I think we all laugh.
Thousands of years, this was the predominant explanation. And actually, when you ask children how do we see, this is what we believe in our gut before we're taught. We have to unlearn this. This is what we naturally assume. Actually, 1/3 of college students, when you poll them, say that vision is accomplished by beams that come out of your eyes. I swear to you that's true. 33% of college students believe this is still true. And this is a theory that when you have a theory like this, every time someone tried to attack the theories, there was always, since it seems like it's such an obvious answer, what people would do is say, let's look for how your example of how this can't, maybe not is right, is incorrect in some way. And they would attack, they would seek out, they would always kick it to the side whenever it got attacked. These are all called superseded scientific theories. There's so many of them, they're wonderful. For at least 700 years we have documents that people believe that geese grew on trees. And the idea was that there's these things called goose trees, and they reached a certain maturity, and the goose pod would pop off, and the goose would fly out of it, right? Because they would find barnacles floating around in rivers connected to wood, and they thought the wood was the branch from the tree, and the barnacle was a goose that hadn't quite fully formed. I mean, the actual answer was migration, but they didn't know migration existed, so they thought this was the truth. The idea of spontaneous generation, that flies come out, tainted meat becomes flies. Like it turns into them. It transmutates into flies. Or if you put a pile of dirty rags, and I swear this is in scientific literature, if you put a pile of dirty rags in a corner, it will become mice. It will turn into mice. Be careful, don't do that. It will become mice. If you put a log in a fire, it will transmutate into salamanders. Not that there were salamanders in the log and they escaped the horrible death of the fire, that they were actually turned into. Fire can turn life, can turn it on. And of course, the geocentric model of the universe, the idea of the Earth is the center of everything. And they made these really beautiful ories, these mechanical objects that showed where all the things were circling. And whenever they would find planets, which planet means wanderer, they would be like, how come it does this? And so they would actually make even more complicated mechanical devices that would do the twisty stuff just to keep that theory in place. So, and then the numeric model of medicine, the blood, bile, phlegm, and black bile, yellow bile, and that's the source of all health and sickness, is having these, having 20% less black bile than you should have today. Or, oh, you have a fever, maybe we should bleed you for a little while. You can cure a fever with a knife. So, this is called theory-induced blindness, also sometimes called disconfirmation bias, because it's sort of the opposite of confirmation bias, or the inverse of it, which is that you have this assumption, and every time somebody challenges it, and it's a pretty good challenge, you say, well, there must be something, I got to figure out why that challenge is wrong, not maybe my theory is wrong. And scientists love to talk about this because there's so much history in science. Neil deGrasse Tyson, the possible source of all conflict in the world, believe what you want, where it feels good rather than what is objectively true. And Daniel Kahneman says, adherence to a belief about how the world works is, the definition of theory-induced blindness is adherence to a belief about how the world works that prevents you from seeing how it really works. And he says that once you have accepted a theory, it's very difficult to expunge it. Once you have taken a tool into your possession and it seems to work every time, or it's really reliable, it becomes very difficult to notice when it is flawed and maybe when it's time to develop a new tool.
And that is the moment, right? Or at least think about how it could shift. I mean, Flickr started out as a game screen capture sharing service, but they were like, oh, there's something to this whole like photo sharing thing, maybe we should do that. And they shifted and suddenly they're in a new business. Again, continually study your audience. Your audience is going to change. They're going to change from year to year. Your users, or their expectations, their needs, their context, they're all going to change from year to year. Don't set up your expectations of what these people are doing and then not track back to them and find out how things have changed. Try to disprove your assumptions. I mean, this is true with everything, right? So instead of trying to validate things, let's try to disprove the things that we're trying to do. Next slide. I know you guys have heard of this. I don't want to talk a lot about this. We're about out of time. So Agile provides a huge opportunity to get us out of this. If you just think about the sum cost fallacy, if you wait to test to the end of this process, what are you at risk for? We've put 6 months into this project and you're going to test it and tell me it doesn't work now? Are you kidding me? Of course this is going to work. We're doing it anyway, right? With Agile, the idea is we test over and over again, test early, test often. And that notion of if you test early enough, you have an opportunity to shift while there's still enough sort of political will to say, yeah, maybe it is a better opportunity to shift. And hopefully you're not going to get caught into your confirmation bias of saying, well, this obviously has to work. I think in addition to your processes, take a look at your environment and your culture. You need to develop a culture where people can disagree with you and where people at all levels of your organization can disagree with you, right? You have to have people who will play your devil's advocate and play that role for you so that you can challenge your own thinking and your own biases. You need to challenge each other. You need to reward people in your organization for challenging each other so that there is this culture of challenge and this culture of looking at these situations from different angles. And when that young person says, you know, and they take a risk, right? They're like, actually, I think this is kind of dumb because of X, Y, and Z. Like, reward that moment and like say to them, thank you for speaking up. That was fantastic of you. And then, like I said, letting people understand these cognitive patterns. Again, we're all going to do these things, but at least if all of us understand some of these things, then we can kind of see when other people are committing them.
I like to think about pilots. Pilots are incredibly well trained, and a lot is riding on their shoulders, and they know that airplane inside and out, yet they still use a checklist to take off every single time because they don't trust themselves. They don't trust that they have the power to not miss a tiny mistake 1 time out of 1,000, which could mean a really big deal. We tend to, in a lot of our professions, not instate anything like that, even though...
Yeah, how many creative directors have a checklist still of things that they do, right? They're just going by gut, and they're going to continue to go by gut. And it's okay. And again, intuition will bring you pretty far in this profession, but I think there's always those checks that we need to put into place. And again, we'll run out of time, but I think there's things that you can do in yourself. Again, ultimately, this comes back to knowing yourself and being aware of yourself. Be open to criticism from all people.